it's as much for the other party as it is for you, because it should be a document that also reassures them to know, like, if this kind of thing happens, how would you handle it?
Veux-tu danser avec moi?
Today we're here to talk about, do you need a contract?
And my answer to that is yes. But often I think the reason why, and my approach to them is not why a lot of people think they do. It's really to remind two good faith parties what they agreed to. I've heard the expression sometimes, good contracts make good friends. And I really think that's true. And I have a big philosophy to keep them short and understandable to non-lawyers. It's really sort of to say, like, oh, if something unexpected happens and everyone's in good faith, but there might be kind of like a discrepancy of, like, how do we deal with that? You know, like, prime example, you're working on, let's say, for an example, a product launch video, but the company decides that they're not going to launch that product after all, and it's canceled partway through. What's everyone's obligations? And maybe everyone means well, but sometimes there can be a difference of opinion about what you do in those circumstances. But if you have a document that's just like simple in common language of what did we agree to do if something like this were to happen, it just preserves the relationship. And that's why I say it's about aligning expectations. And it's just a non-adversarial kind of roadmap or guidebook, I think, when it's done well.
You know, sometimes we're working with large multinational companies, but our contact, who's maybe in the marketing department, can easily sign a proposal because it just says, here's what we're going to do, the budget's in there and the deliverables, and that doesn't necessarily need to go through legal. But if we send the more legalese 4-page production agreement, then that has to get approved by a lot of people. It can sort of slow down the whole approval process. And on smaller shoots, that's not really necessary. Also, for some of those large companies, they will have their own sort of vendor agreement, which we will default to. Like, a lot of the times when we're presenting a production agreement, it's because our client doesn't have one, because they're not necessarily regularly hiring production companies. So it really depends a little bit on the size of the project and the stakes. But very often what I call just a proposal can function as a production agreement, as long as you've said, you're just sort of making sure that both parties understand what the work that's going to be done is, what the deliverables are, what the terms are, and what it's going to cost.
I think one misconception is people think it's only a contract if it's written in like real legalese, but technically even emails are actually like a contract. That's a great point, that a lot of times too, like, the kind of contract you'll be looking for will depend a bit on the circumstances and scales of the project. And it's only on much larger stuff where we would actually, get a lawyer involved and do the full thing. But, even when we hire freelancers, like, I appreciate that setting of expectations where, like, some freelancers will include something that's like a deal memo in their email that just says, if I'm hiring someone on day rate, they'll say, oh, my day is this long. After this many hours, I charge like overtime. I think sometimes people might worry about how that's perceived, but I look at that and I'm just like, that's great. I don't have to guess. I know this person is like, knows what they're doing and is communicating it clearly. So for me, that's just like all a plus, not a negative.
And let me ask you about what happens when like changes do come up. And so you have a phone call and they're like, hey, we need to do something a little bit different. Do you feel that you need to update a contract? You just write an email saying, hey, we agreed to this?
So for a small change that's a small scope adjustment, usually that'll just be in an email, especially if it's a client I've worked with. If it's larger, I'll usually just resend like a amendment for them to sign. That sort of if it's large enough, we would sort of define the scope of that scope change, if that makes sense, of like whatever that new piece is. I find also having someone sign their name, because a lot of times you're dealing with organizations where sort of accountability can be kind of diffuse, and I feel that a lot of times just having someone sign their name to something, like, then you have a definitive point of contact and it makes somebody feel accountable. Like, I found that when people have to sign their name, they just read it more carefully. They take more time to really like understand those expectations. And also it gives you a very definitive, like, this project is starting, because sometimes when you have a good relationship with clients, you can projects can kind of soft start where they're like, oh, we're thinking of doing this.
That's interesting. I'd never really thought about it like that, but that totally makes sense. You get someone, when they write their name, they're vested in the project now.